are the ethical issues related to interventional trial? This disclaimer that it is based on, presentation is based on my experience, right? And it is not exhaustive. I might have missed few things. So please feel free to add or correct wherever you feel that I am not right. So in my experience, ethics seems to be very difficult for people when we are submitting our studies, but it is very simple. It is nothing. It is a honesty, morality, and our own consciousness. If our own consciousness clears a trial ethically, then I never found that ethics committee is giving any remark to stop it. These are the content of my session. Overview of interventional trial, what are the stages of trial, ethical aspect, safety monitoring, adverse event reporting, compensation, regulatory requirement, and few other important issues, which as an investigator you must know, and many times it is missed. So clinical trial is any research or study that prospectively assign human participant to one or more health-related intervention to evaluate the effect of health intervention. The effect could be positive, it could be beneficial, or it could be harmful. The important point about an interventional trial is that the participants are assigned to a group by the researcher. The treatment or intervention is not chosen by the patient participant himself. This is the researcher will decide that which treatment you are going to get. So that is the point which make a trial different from treatment. This is the whole crux of a story. We all know there are 4 or 5 phases of trial. Phase 0, just to few lines I would like to summarize. Primary objective of a phase 0 trial is to study whether it can modulate the target in human being for which it is intended, basically whether it is acting on the pathogen, it is acting on the receptor for which it is designed, what is its major metabolism, route of metabolism, and it is a part of regulatory requirement before moving to the phase 1 study. So very few participants, hardly 2, 4, 5 participants are included, and drugs are used in lower doses than the dose expected to have some beneficial or pharmacological effect. Phase 1 study is primary objective is to establish the major safety profile, major toxicity of the study of the drug, and it is done in ICU setting in healthy volunteers under strict supervision, and primary objective is to monitor the toxicity, its pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics. It has no therapeutic benefit. This study has no therapeutic objective. That's why we are using healthy volunteers. Patients cannot be enrolled in phase 1 study. In phase 2 study, typically it is done to confirm the major toxicities in a larger sample size, say 50 to 200 participants. Then also to identify the toxicities which are less toxic but important, which can affect the quality of life or which can stop the treatment. And it is classically known as dose finding study. So participants, suppose you have included 50 participants, they will be divided in 3-4 groups, and each group will be given a different dose, 50 milligram of drug, 100 milligram, 200 milligram. So based on the phase 0 study and other literature, we may assume a range of drug dose that this much drug may be effective, and depending upon that, different groups are created. So it's a sort of dose finding study. And the phase 3 study, it is the most important what we are doing in clinical studies here. I don't think that anybody in the institute is doing phase 0 or phase 1, phase 2 studies. We are always doing phase 3 trial, in which the interventional drug is compared with the standard of care. And that is what we clinicians do, right? So we are comparing the effect in terms of cost, effect, toxicity. We may also compare in terms of route of administration, new indication, new route of administration, new form of drug doses, new dose. Means suppose drug is effective in 1 milligram, and we may say that 0.5 milligram is good enough. So that will also be a phase 3 trial. And phase 4 is typically a post-marketing surveillance is what we know to know the uncommon side effect which manifest over the years when the cumulative doses is high or when the number of participant has increased, millions of people have used. So few drugs we know that which have withdrawal because of their toxicities. Those are phase 4 trial, which we don't do. Typically, those drugs have studies are done by the pharma company. So we are typically involved in phase 3 trial. So types of trial could be preventive. We might be doing a trial to prevent a side effect or effect of a disease. It can be have diagnostic objective or it can be a therapeutic objective. And intervention could be, this is important to know, can be in form of a medication, medicine, psychological intervention, something like counseling. Alcoholic liver disease, one group we are going to counsel for de-addiction, other group we are not going to counsel. So that is also an intervention. Health education, fatty liver disease, one group we are going to educate for healthy eating, healthy sleep, healthy habits, and another group we are giving standard of care. Radiation therapy, that can also be an intervention, vaccine for prevention, surgical device or technique. So it can be in any form. It's not essential a medicine. Established intervention but not substantiated by scientific evidence means some intervention you may find in literature which are in use for decades, but there is no evidence to support it. So that can also be an intervention trial, which are in use for decades, but no evidence. Established intervention for a new purpose, as we have discussed, some drug, like many drugs have been used for COVID-19, starting from ivermectin, azithromycin, etc., etc. So all these things are also the new indication. Intervention could also be in form of withholding the established intervention. Some treatment which is given, but we are going to stop this intervention in 1 hour. And standard of care is that the person will be getting the treatment and intervention is person will not be getting the treatment. So even stopping an intervention could be an intervention. Altered administration we have already discussed. Change in method of delivering. Yes, DOTS therapy is very well-known example where the in standard of care person was given medicine and he was supposed to eat at home every day, but in DOTS the person is supposed to visit to the health facility and take medicine in front of the healthcare worker. So that is also an intervention. So now when we are doing interventional trial, it can be two types. It can be non-academic trial, which are typically done by the pharmaceutical industries, which they want to launch their new drug or prove their efficacy, and the academic trial, which we are doing. So we are doing both type of trial depending upon the sources we are using to fund our study. A non-academic trial, according to the rule, refer to a systemic study of new drug in human subject. So the crux is, it is a new drug. Means for a new drug, we cannot do an academic trial. But for a new indication, we can do an academic trial. For a new dosage form, new dose, new route of administration, we can do an academic trial. So don't get confused. But a new drug, we cannot do an academic trial. That has to be a non-academic trial. Same thing what we have discussed. Approved drug, new indication, we can do an academic trial. So for academic trial, the rules are relatively easier because we have to work for the progress of science also, research in academic center also. This is a very important slide because most of us, at least 90% of us, are involved in academic trials. So investigator has dual responsibility of being an investigator as well as a sponsor. Here, our institute may be the sponsor. So the role of a sponsor, which pharma company was playing or supposed to play in a non-academic trial, here either we or the institute is supposed to play. So what are the ways to arrange financial arrangement to account for any injury, any loss, It can be made available, or there can be some made arrangement. Arrangement in the sense you have done a trial and you have taken an insurance for the participant from third party. So if anyone have any injury related to trial, so that compensation will be given by the third party insurer. Here is the ethical aspect, which is the I am supposed to talk. That was the background of the work. See, these are the important ethical aspect which we forget when we do clinical trial, academic trial, because sometimes the idea is we are obsessed with our idea that what I think is correct. The first and the foremost ethical aspect is equipoise of evidence. For doing any academic trial, there should be equipoise of evidence. Equipoise of evidence means there should not be clear evidence that whether intervention is effective or not effective. Either there should not be any data or data should be on the both side. That you cannot decide based on the present available data. So whenever we are writing a review of literature, introduction and background, why we are doing this trial, that is the area where we have to mention that there is equipoise of evidence. There are data to support that the intervention is effective and the other trial is showing it is not effective. If we are doing injustice with equipoise of evidence, then entire objective of doing a clinical trial is gone. There is no point of doing a trial. Then it's better to do an observational study, retrospective study, generate the data, and then go for a clinical trial. Second thing where we can do injustice and we can violate the ethical aspect is assumption at the time of sample size calculation. Because we feel in next 1.5 years I can recruit only 50 patients, so I will take a sample size assumption so much that I need only 50 patients. But that is not correct. Whether I am able to complete this study or not, it is immaterial. Because sample size calculation is entirely based on our assumption, what we are assuming that whether the effect is how much benefit is going to give. You assume that it's giving 60% benefit, your sample size will be very small. And you assume that the benefit is 20%, sample size will be big. So just to cover up and complete the study during our tenure, we should not make a wrong assumption at the time of sample size calculation. Because everything is done, and if your assumption is not correct and reviewer may raise a question, ethics committee is not going to check what you have into, how you calculated the sample size. It's your responsibility. Assume correctly before calculating your sample size. And this is one of the very common fault which we do. Even published paper when I am reading, I find it very commonly that the assumption is wrong. And ethic approval before the start of trial. Ethic approval should be taken before start of trial. In our center, at least we should submit the study before start of the trial, because if anyone develops any adverse reaction related to trial, then it is a major issue and then the investigator is in problem. Because you cannot, in this electronic era, you cannot go back in time. If there is no ethical issue, there is no risk of injury to the participant, then it's fine. Nobody will ask you. But if there is any risk, then nobody can save you. And as I told in the first slide, that the morality and consciousness, we should be very cautious that there is no additional financial burden. If no, at least whatever minimum possible related to travel, stay, food, because the person has to spend money. If he need an extra visit to participate in your trial, he has to lose wages for 1 day. One accompanying person, he might have to lose his wages, travel, discomfort, extra investigation, which was not needed for patient care. So we should be very cautious about it. I know it is not possible 100% to cover it up, but at least we should try to do that. Whatever benefit we can give in turn to the patient, we should give. So he should feel happy that he has got something by spending something. Use of placebo. So when we are doing international trial, standard of care or placebo many times use. Standard of care is fine. Nobody will ask you a question. But when you are using a placebo as compared to an active intervention, then when we can use placebo? If there is no established effective therapy available, that means there is no established standard of care, then we can use placebo. Or withholding standard of care will not expose the participant for any harm, discomfort, or it is minimal only. If the disease is self-limited, or if you are using standard of care, then the result is not going to be scientifically valid. And addition of placebo will not do harm to the participant. So these are the criteria which are the situation. Like in hepatitis C virus treatment, in compensated cirrhosis of non-cirrhotic patient, we are still today we can do some drug compared to placebo, because delaying the treatment for 6 months or 3 months is not going to harm to the patient. But for a cirrhotic patient, it is not acceptable, because in 6 months the disease may worsen and he may develop complication. But non-cirrhotic patient, where you are there for 20 years, then wait for 6 months. You find that the risk of transmission is not high. You have explained the risk of transmission to the spouse or by blood donation or organ donation. This is another important point. In multi-center trial, each center has to take ethic clearance from their centers. It is not that only PI is supposed to take clearance from one center. If there are 20 centers, then each 20 center should take clearance from the center, and each center can recruit a participant only after getting clearance from their center. And it is the site-specific PI who is responsible. So if I am doing a trial with those 4 other centers, and so each center has to take Dr. ABC, XYZ, each one of them has to take clearance from the center, and if any ethical misconduct or research-related adverse event happens, the responsibility lies with the PI who is belonging to that site. Safety monitoring. So safety of the data, safety of the patient participant, and safety of the investigator. These are the 3 components of any trial. So each of them, safety is very important. The storage of trial-related document like consent form and PID, it is important. At least for 7 years, this document has to be stored for any interventional trial. This is important for the safety of the investigator, because somebody can come back and say that I was not informed about the trial and I was enrolled in the trial. So you have to have his or her signed participant information document and consent form written in his language, local language, Hindi, English, or any other local language, and store it. DCGI approval for the new drug. If it is a new drug you are using, then must show that the drug is approved by DCGI for use in trial. Approval by Animal Ethics Committee if your study involve animals. Approval by Institute Biosafety Committee if your study include anything biohazard material like radiation, genome related study, virus culture related study which can be transmitted. So where the biosafety issue is a concern. So different committees, not only ethics committee, but there can be different type of committees where you need additional approval before starting your studies depending upon the requirement, especially for people who are working in nuclear medicine or radiation department, where biosafety radiation committee, biosafety approval is also needed. Similarly, necessarily biosafety laboratory label should be there, if which kind of, there's entire list of pathogen which is available in DST website, which pathogen you are studying specifically, and you see what level of biosafety level lab is required from 1 to 4, and if you don't have that kind of lab, you cannot study. Safe disposal of biomedical waste. This is also important, and I believe that everyone take care of it. So for data safety, that was the safety of the participant and the safety of the investigator, we need data safety and monitoring board. Monitoring of all the trials are needed, but all the trials does not need to be monitored by data safety and monitoring board, which is a different type of board where specific requisitions are there that this kind of people of this expertise has to be there. We don't have a data safety monitoring board in our institute as of now. So, but we should know that it is there. When you need read good journal, they mention that the study was monitored by data safety monitoring board. It is very critical when we are doing a study where the primary outcome is that its intervention is going to save the life. It prevents severe disease progression or reduces the risk of major health related outcome. Means where the outcome is very severe, you can say. Because any positive and negative result which is fabricated can have very important impact in the society. So monitoring by DSMB is particularly important if studies with mortality and the severe mortality is a primary endpoint. Interim data analysis is required. Then it is required if interim data analysis. Most of the time, interim analysis is done where we are not sure about the result and the outcome may be very different. So we do an interim analysis roughly at the midpoint of the study and communicate the result to the data safety monitoring board and the ethics committee and take their approval to continue the study. If they don't give approval, we have to stop the study. And in that case, data safety monitoring board and ethics committee will have full access to the data. They have right to evaluate and analyze the data and interpret in their own sense. In early phase of a novel intervention, because we don't have any data, studies where data justify the early termination, where the outcome was very, very extreme. Early study of a high-risk intervention, same thing, study carried out in emergency situation, because many times in emergency situation, ethics are compromised, and studies which improve vulnerable population. Research-related injury, how to define harm or loss that can occur to an individual as a result of participation in research, irrespective of the manner in which it has occurred. It includes expected and unexpected adverse event. Means some adverse event which is known in literature and some adverse event which has never been reported in the literature. It may happen. So serious adverse event related to intervention and any medical injury caused by the procedure. An adverse event is called to be a serious one if it causes death or injury is so serious that it requires hospitalization, or it causes prolongation of hospitalization, causes significant inability which is permanent or temporary, especially permanent, congenital anomaly if you are doing some trial in pregnant women, and requirement of intervention to prevent permanent impairment or damage. Basically, if it is causing death or it is causing hospitalization, prolongation of hospitalization or required intervention. In summary, these four things that will qualify for a severe injury. And investigator is responsible for reporting of all the adverse event, especially severe adverse event, within 24 hours of knowledge of adverse event by the investigator. So as soon as it is reported to the investigator, within 24 hours, he has to give a preliminary information to the concerned ethics committee that this adverse event is reported. And within 2 weeks, a complete detailed report is to be submitted. This within 24-hour information can be given even on Sundays, non-working days, holiday, by email, fax, by any route. It's not by in writing only. Any way of communication you have to communicate. And free medical management of adverse event should be given as long as it requires or the ethics committee decide whether this injury was related to the trial or not. Compensation, a financial payment to the research participation of their legal hands when temporary or permanent injury or death occur due to participation in the biomedical and health research. How it is calculated, I will not go into the detail, but this is for sure that this is dependent on the age of the person, and most of the time we are enrolling young participant. So what is the age of the participant at the time of enrollment? What was his annual income, socioeconomic status, his previous income tax return, all those things. Depending upon that and the extent of injury, your compensation is decided, and it is huge. It is the responsibility of the investigator or funding agency or the sponsor, means the institute, to arrange for this financial requirement. Besides these things, there are some other regulatory requirement which should keep in mind depending upon the type of study we are doing. Is the like National Apex Committee for Stem Cell Research Therapy. If we are doing something related to stem cell therapy, then we need to complete the requirements of Stem Cell Committee, Apex Committee. Genomic data has to be deposited for all the genomic data related to any field in the repositories. And there are other guidelines, good clinical practice guideline, good laboratory practice. So if your trial includes some investigation, laboratory testing, so that laboratory testing has to be performed according to the good laboratory practice guideline. We have to follow that standard guideline. So if we are using some drug, then drug has to be procured or provided by the person, by the source, who has followed good manufacturing practice to manufacture the drug. So we are not using a poor quality drug. And if we are doing some trial related to Ayush, means alternative medicine, then they have their own good clinical practice guideline and has to be followed. Interim analysis to avoid unnecessary harm to the participant. In the intervention harm, if the intervention is harmful, and to avoid unnecessary loss to the participant in the controlled arm if intervention is useful. And result must be communicated. Impact of dishonesty, please think about this slide before doing any dishonesty in our research, that an intervention trial, a dishonesty can have impact on the patient, means the participant, researcher, means you, institute. Because when you are submitting a paper and going to journal and reviewer, nobody knows you and me. Most of the time, he knows which group it is submitted and which institute where the work was done. So if something we have done wrong, the impact is going to the entire institute. Can anyone tell me who is the scientist in the Harvard University in your field? No, but everyone knows Harvard University. So this is the impact. If something is coming which is unethical, wrong from Harvard, it will be flooded in all the social media platform everywhere. So it is the institute which is harmed. It is the department which is harmed. You and I are the minimum harm which is coming, it is to the investigator. And it is the harm going to the country. So impact is much more wider than we can think of. Beside that, this is the last slide, that ultimate goal of any trial is to get a good publication. So please don't forget to register your trial in CTRI and get a CTRI number before enrolling your first participant. Please follow the reporting guideline according to the Equator Consort guideline for trial, so that you are not missing anything while you are reporting your result. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what good study you have done. Nobody will accept it. Role of funder in the study, you must be sure and clear. Conflict of interest of the investigator and trial supervision. What I want to say, especially I want to highlight about the reporting guideline. When we are doing a trial and we have made our inclusion and exclusion criteria, we find that 12 patients were excluded and we don't keep any record of them. We have to keep record of all those who are excluded and why excluded, because that is the part of your consort guideline. ultimately you will give some hypothetical data. So it's better to imbibe good practice at least for 3 years so that you can continue to do good practice in life instead of creating a data, because sometimes we feel that we will create this data, but over the year people come to know that you are generating data or you are creating data. Everyone knows. You can hide it for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but beyond that, everyone knows. So in summary, participants are assigned with the researcher in interventional trials, so the large amount of responsibility and ethics lies with the investigator. So be honest while planning your interventional trial in context of sample size calculation, for assumptions, for comparator arm, whether placebo or standard of care, and the financial burden and the risk of the participant. Do not forget to register in CTRI, and responsibility of investigator is increased in academic trial than non-academic trial. Because in non-academic trial, you have many more working hand. You have much more support from the pharma company. But in academic trial, you don't have money. But again, if you are doing a good academic trial, you will get much bigger name and reputation than in a sponsored trial. So think of impact before deviating from ethics. This is the last line which I want to say. Thank you. So any questions?